Welcome back to the C Block, or last section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news. If you want to keep up on the latest news in the industry, you should download our free app, PCMTV. Yes, it's available at the App Store or Google Play, and the QR code on the screen will take you right there. Then you will be able to get this show on demand starting on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Plus, you will find many of the best of news and talk shows Pro Cannabis Media has produced over the past 3 years. One guy who's been reporting for us for 2 years is our master day trader, Doug Miller, who is high on Wall Street.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Specialty marijuana finance company Silver Spike Investment Corp has closed on a portfolio of loans and changed its name to Chicago Atlantic BDC. Silver Spike said in February it planned to acquire Chicago Atlantic loan portfolio. The combined company has elected to be regulated as a business development company and will trade on the NASDAQ stock exchange as LIEN. Silver Spike previously traded on the NASDAQ as SSIC. With the acquisition, Chicago Atlantic has net assets of roughly $300 million and investments in 28 portfolio companies. Let's see how LIEN is doing on the stock charts. It's trading around $11.90 and it jumped up on this news. So watch for some pullback as it sets back up to go up more. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast, I'm Doug Miller.
Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis Report. So what we have in Canada this week is the Green Tone Company in Quebec, as well as the Salem Technology. They are going to be pairing up together and creating a collaboration when it comes to a new light system. This light system is going to be something that is going to be beneficial to not only the Quebec cultivation sector, but it's also going to be presenting and creating a little bit more of a different way for us to be growing and cultivating when it comes to a lot of the LPs out there and are needing a little bit more of a boost. Next, what we have is a decline when it comes to the cannabis usage in 2022 versus 2023. We saw a overall decline of 6.9 million in 2023 from 7.1 million in 2024. In 2022, sorry. This is something that we have seen, especially when it comes to the market and the pricing, due to the fact that the overall over the 5 years has been something that we have been trying to, I want to say, fix. But at the moment in time, we are seeing a rise in vapes. So vapes as in tobacco. So hopefully we could steer them clear from that and be a little bit more token friendly. Last but not least, we have the Globe and Mail, which is one of our newspapers here in Toronto, Ontario. They have done their most popular brands, as in all of Canada, and 4 of our Canadian brands made that list. So one of them was Sundial, the other was Q&1, the third one was Event Brands, and the last one was High Tide, which are all great brands, especially due to the fact that we have them all throughout Canada and Ontario, and that's just a boost when it comes to positivity in our sector. So this is Debi Facey with the Cannabis Coast to Coast, the Coast to Coast Cannabis Report News. Have a great one. Peace.
In Colorado, which along with Washington State were the first 2 states to legalize adult use of cannabis, now 12 years later, neither state has become a role model for other states, and now tax revenues are down in Colorado. Here's Xavier Jaillet with more from Colorado.
This is Xavier Jaillet. I am the chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and a non-attorney professional with the McDonald Hopkins law firm. I'm also the Colorado correspondent for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm excited to be bringing to you guys all 2 stories this week out of the Colorado region that I think our viewers will find relevant. The first one in a headline that I think is going to come as no surprise to many seasoned cannabis professionals is that Colorado's tax revenue year over year has continued to decline, specifically sourced from cannabis, of course. Now, overall tax revenue, I'm not going to comment on that, but the cannabis-derived tax revenue has declined over the last 3 years or so. And I think there's really two reasons for that. And that is, first, the pandemic, COVID, really spurned kind of a craze, let's say, of consumption. Dispensaries and cannabis businesses were named essential businesses. They were allowed to remain open, continue serving the public. And in turn, I think they got used to perhaps a bit of an inflated, yearly or monthly throughput when it comes to consumers in the space. So we're seeing a decline from that. And the second piece, I think, that contributes to the declining tax revenue is the fact that so many new markets have continued to open up across the United States. Colorado and Washington were once, targets for canna-tourism or other forms of tourism or travel that perhaps did factor in or consider the fact that there was recreational cannabis access here in the state. So it'll be interesting to see how this levels out, but I do think it's also endemic of the, perhaps onerous regulations that cannabis operators are subjected to here in Colorado, and a reminder that overregulation, especially overtaxation, does not necessarily kill black market and illicit activities, and instead encourages consumers to continue purchasing their cannabis products from those sources. Now, second piece of news I want to bring to your attention is that Colorado Springs, the large urban area south of Denver, largest, kind of second largest, let's say, metropolitan area in Colorado, if you can call it that, is considering allowing recreational cannabis. Since 2014, since the state passed recreational cannabis access, Colorado Springs has actually declined to allow recreationally licensed cannabis businesses within city limits. There's no recreational dispensaries, no recreational cultivators or processors in the city limits. So it'll be interesting to see if that measure is approved. We expect to learn more about that in the coming months. Now, one thing that's sure is that city officials have already indicated that they will be issuing very limited license counts, and they've established zoning regulations already, for example, prohibiting dispensaries from being within a 1 mile radius of any school serving a K through 12 student population. So exciting times to see, potentially another large population begin to gain access to recreational cannabis here in Colorado, which again, may be a surprise to some of our viewers. But also a bit of a downturn when it comes to tax revenue in the state, mostly because of pandemic highs returning to normal, canna tourism being down, but then again also a reminder that onerous regulations are not always the best choice, and they may in fact drive consumers back to the illicit market. That's it for this week. I'm excited to come to bring you more stories next week, and thank you all for tuning in.
Back here on the East Coast, the Washington District of Columbia is now suing to stop the illegal operations that are popping up in the shadow of the Capitol. Andrew Behringer has more on what's going on in our nation's capital.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. House Democrats urged the DEA to expedite cannabis rescheduling in a significant move for cannabis policy at the federal level. 2 House Democrats are pressing for updates regarding the rescheduling of cannabis. The representatives have called on the DEA Administrator Ann Milgram to take swift action in rescheduling cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3. Now, if we remember, the DEA began this process in early May, opening a public comment period that saw overwhelming support for this change. The agency has scheduled a hearing for December 2nd, just weeks after this upcoming presidential election. This timing adds a layer of political intrigue to an already contentious issue. The call for action reflects growing bipartisan momentum for cannabis reform at the federal level. Now, if we look at DC local news, a coalition of licensed cannabis businesses in Washington, D.C. have filed a federal lawsuit against 24 illicit cannabis operators. The Alliance of Legal Cannabis Entities, or ACLE, is taking aim at unlicensed dispensaries, their owners, and landlords, accusing them of unfair competition and false advertising. The lawsuit alleges that these illicit operators have diverted over $600 million annually from the legal market, forcing several licensed businesses to shut down. Now, despite these warnings from the city officials, these shops continue to operate under the Initiative 71's gifting model, which the city has deemed illegal for commercial purposes. The suit also claims many of these shops are advertising interstate delivery, both clear violations of local and federal laws. The ACLE is seeking damages equal to 3 times the profits received by each defendant over the past 3 years. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Now with the presidential race in its final month plus, Senator Ron Wyden's bill to regulate hemp, there is a lot on the plate of the political director for NORML, Morgan Fox. He talked with PCM founder Jimmy Young this week.
We've got a very special guest on our Cannabis Coast to Coast News one-on-one this week. It is Morgan Fox, the political director of NORML. And Morgan, as the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, I'm certainly happy to be talking to you this morning. Lots going on down there in Washington, D.C., isn't there?
Well, thanks for having me, as always, Jimmy. Yeah, I mean, in some aspects, there's a lot going on. In other aspects, there's really nothing going on. We're entering into campaign season, which means that, since the Congress was able to narrowly avoid a government shutdown, now we're in a point where all eyes are on the elections, and I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see any real legislative movement in the next couple of weeks. But we have seen some movement leading up to this point, and I think that it is positioning us very, very well for the post-election period when, I think it's anybody's guess what could happen, and I think it's largely dependent on the results of both the presidential as well as congressional elections. But that's really going to change the dynamic in terms of what sort of cannabis-related legislation we might be able to see in the remainder of the 118th. And then it's also going to change the dynamic about how preparations are being made for the 119th Congress.
Yeah, and as a lame duck Congress, I'm not quite sure in this current environment that's going to be, they're not going to be very busy, let's just say. What, am I accurate on that, you think?
I think it's anybody's guess. Congress could be very, very busy in a number of different ways. I mean, who knows if it's going to be cannabis related? But I do know that, from my conversations with lawmakers, that there is appetite to continue moving standalone cannabis policy reform across the finish line. Obviously, we're going to have to be talking about another round of appropriations, but I think it's much more likely that we're going to get another continuing resolution and push the entire conversation around appropriations issues into the FY25 negotiations. That could be really, really good for cannabis policy reform. But again, we don't know what the political environment is going to look like around those conversations. So it's very difficult to predict.
Right. Oh, that's for sure. And I'm not even sure I've got so many questions I want to start with. But since we're already leaning into that direction a little bit, there is definitely both sides of the aisle candidates are all basically saying they're supporting the Yes on 3 adult use ballot initiative. The Safe and Smart Florida folks put out a recent advertisement basically showing former President Trump and Vice President Harris's policy. And also it was released this week where you have Kamala Harris on the NBA Players podcast looking at not looking at the camera, but looking at the hosts of the show and saying, I think it should be legalized. It really is, I think, the first time I've ever heard a presidential candidate use those words. Is that accurate?
Oh, unfortunately, far from. Well, I mean, fortunately for us, Harris in the 2020 campaign said the exact same thing and came out strongly in favor of legalization and decriminalization. Harris also, as a senator, sponsored the MORE Act on the Senate side, which would have descheduled cannabis and regulated it in a fashion. And I think that while, as far as I know, none of the candidates for president or vice president have officially endorsed Amendment 3, they've all made relatively supportive comments about legalization. Only one of them really has a track record that supports those statements. But at the same time, I think that it's really, really important that we're in a position now where, like, the two major party candidate groups are all saying the same thing, that cannabis prohibition needs to end and that people should not be jailed for using cannabis. I think that there's also a significant amount of support for providing states with a fair amount of self-determinism, but also when you look at really what people are saying in terms of policy, having some sort of federal guidelines. But in terms of just what the candidates have said, everybody is united in that people shouldn't be arrested for cannabis. That is fairly historic. I think that a lot of other politicians down ticket in every single race should really be paying attention to that and thinking about their positions. Not just from a political point of view, but from the simple truth that prohibition is a failure and that continuing to support failed policies is bad for your constituents, it's bad for you politically, and it's bad for our country.
Right. That's great. Absolutely. And, I think back to the Farm Bill of 2018 and the Pandora's box that was opened when the Congress allowed hemp at 0.3% defined. And that too is under attack lately. And now we have this cottage industry, if you will, of Delta-8 products that are designed to attract younger people to them, unregulated, unlicensed, and they're available at gas stations, convenience stores, and smoke shops. And at least now there is someone in our government who recognized that, you know what, we got to do the job that the Farm Bill wanted the FDA to do when they first passed it, but they never did anything over the last 6 years. So let's talk a little bit about Senator Wyden's bill. And is that a helpful thing at this point?
So Senator Wyden introduced a bill that would more or less regulate intoxicating cannabinoids, regardless of their source of derivation, whether it's from cannabis or hemp. But these are specifically focused on products that have been an outgrowth of the hemp industry, really. There was no legislative intent for intoxicating cannabinoids, et cetera. So the thing about the Wyden bill, though, is that it actually does not regulate synthetics. It regulates hemp-derived products, and I think that that's a really big difference because the vast majority of Delta-8 products out there, I would say like 99.99999%, are synthesized from CBD that was itself derived from hemp. So the Wyden bill would not, enshrine those sort of products with any sort of protection. And in fact, that despite a lot of claims in the hemp industry that the Farm Bill legalized these, there was certainly no indication of legislative intent around that. And the DEA has said on several occasions that no, these products are not legal. That being said, we have seen federal courts that said, yes, they are legal because of the Farm Bill. So it's a pretty confusing place that is, I think, really in need of legislative clarification, as well as regulatory control on the part of the FDA and other federal agencies. I think that the recognition of this, because there have been good actors in the space, but there have been a lot of bad actors in this space. As you mentioned, people that are selling like garbage bathtub products that are being produced by people with no knowledge of chemistry. Right. That are being slapped into mass-produced packaging that's got cartoon characters on it, and that is masquerading as licensed and regulated and tested cannabis products. We see a proliferation of these products in places that don't do any sort of ID testing. And so I think that there's a universal understanding that there needs to be some form of regulation.
And finally, tonight, one dispensary in Massachusetts is making a difference during Breast Cancer Awareness Month. It's Netta in Brookline, Franklin, and Northampton. So what is Netta doing? They are selling strawberry-flavored pre-rolls called Pink Rosé. So not only do you get a fruity flavor with your pre-roll, but Netta is donating $1 to the Susan B. Komen Foundation for Breast Cancer. That's called socially responsible capitalism, and this industry continues to develop more ways to give back to the community in addition to the crippling taxes and regulations that they are required to follow. It's not easy in the cannabis world. That'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Remember to download our free app. And like we always say, it's a whole new world of weed out there. I'm Alaina Pinto, reminding you to use it responsibly. We'll see you next time.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
It's Debi Facey with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, Pro Cannabis Media's weekly roundup of the news from the industry. I'm Alaina Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.